It is now my pleasure to introduce this year's commencement speaker, U.S. Senator Cory Booker. Since winning election to the United States Senate in October 2013, Senator Booker has focused on creating new jobs, improving economic opportunity for all of New Jersey's citizens, speeding the pace of Superstorm Sandy recovery, and addressing the economic squeeze facing middle-class families. He has reached across political parties to work on issues such as reforming the criminal justice system and empowering young people through access to apprenticeships and other opportunities. Senator Booker has long been a vocal supporter and friend of William Paterson University. We are honored that he has delivered our commencement address in 2007, and he received then an honorary Doctor of Law degree when he was mayor of Newark. We are delighted that he has returned this year to give the graduating class and their families his perspective on the future of our state and nation. Please welcome Senator Cory Booker to address us as commencement speaker.
Hello, class of 2016. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving me this privilege of being your commencement speaker, but I also want to thank the entire community that has made this day possible. I want to thank the faculty and the staff, your extraordinary trustees and alumni who, even though they have graduated and moved on, still pour their heart, their energy, their resources, and their love into this university. And I want to thank the whole community that helped to support you, those who often are not thanked, the people who clean the bathrooms and the floors, the maintenance staff, and others who are mowing lawns. All of them are part of the William Paterson community, and I'm proud that they all helped to make this day possible. I especially am blown away. Y'all didn't need Barack Obama to draw this kind of crowd here today. You are full to the rafters of supporters that believe in you, your family, your friends, aunts and uncles, an extended circle of love that is surrounding you right now. It brings back heart to me. I tell you, my parents had this saying, my mom says it to me all the time. She says, son, behind every successful child is an astonished parent. And I want to thank you all for astonishing your parents, and that journey has just begun. So I don't want to speak today about the theme of taking risks, but I'm going to take a risk at the beginning of this speech by simply saying to you that I am going to do what is ill-advised. I'm going to be a politician who tells a joke. But I want to use it to frame what I want to impart to you today. And the joke is simply this. It says it's about a church that had a pastor who had a problem. And the pastor's problem was that he had two young boys that were in that church that just kept cutting up and causing trouble. They were young boys, but they were very disrespectful. So the pastor tried to get the head of the deacons to do something about these two young boys, and the head of the deacons tried, talked to him, gave him a stern talking to, but nothing changed with their behavior. So the pastor went to the head of the choir, a very strict disciplinarian. The head of the choir tried to talk to these two young boys, but nothing changed. And finally the pastor said, well, I got to take matters into my own hand. And so the pastor brought these two young brothers down to his office, but he sat the younger boy outside of his office and brought the older boy in and sat him down. Now that older boy was looking at the pastor disrespectfully. He had his arms crossed as he sat in his chair, just staring down the pastor. And the pastor was real taken aback by this, and he thought to himself, what am I going to do to get through to this young kid? And the deacon tried, and the head of the choir tried, and he thought to himself he would try something different. And so he saw his Bible sitting over there in the corner of his desk, and he put his hand on his Bible and looked at the boy and said in his baritone voice, he said, my son, tell me, where is God? And the boy's eyes snapped open, and he looked rapt with attention and almost like he was scared. And I don't know what kind of religious institution you may go to, church or synagogue or temple, but now the pastor, if you're like my pastor, he doubles down on something if it's working. So he picks up the Bible and looks at the boy and says again, "My son, tell me right now, where is God?" And at this point, the boy now starts shaking in his seat, and he's holding on, and he's looking at the pastor, and the pastor thinks, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting through to him." And now he stands up behind his desk and decides to just bring it all home. And so with his Sunday sermon voice, raising his Bible up above his head, he says, "My son, tell me right now, where is God?" And at this point, the boy jumps up out of his chair, frightened as can be, runs out of the pastor's office, sees his little brother sitting there, grabs him by the hand and says, "Man, we got to get out of here. God is missing, and the pastor thinks we took him." Now, I tell you that very bad joke for a reason. We live in this world today where so many people sit back and lament about what is going on. And they wonder, how can we have this injustice? How can we have these challenges? They even look at our current political situation and say, how could this be? And they often ask, where's God? Where's the justice? Where's the peace? Where's the mercy? But the question, I must say, is wrong. The question we should always ask is not, where is God, but where are we? I've been told all my life by my parents that we underestimate the power that we have to impact our world. In fact, Alice Walker said it so poignantly when she said the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place. And so what I want to talk to you about right now is not what you can do to change the world, but the importance of you always thinking, when we're talking about whatever is going on in the world, the importance that you have in manifesting your power in changing your world. And I want to tell you about this by making a confession about one of my greater life mistakes. But before I do that, let me go a little deeper into this concept. You see, I had a father that used to tell me, "Son, there's two ways to go through life. You can go through life as a thermometer, or you can go through life as a thermostat." And he would say, "I don't want you to be the thermometer, because all a thermometer does is it reflects the world around them. If things are hot, it goes up. Things are cold, it goes down. If there's negativity, it gets negative. Positivity is positive. It allows the outside world to determine what you are." He said, "You need to be a thermostat, someone that sets the temperature, that always has a true north compass in your heart, someone that when you walk into the room, you are changing the room. That in fact, you are changing your world by making your decisions about how you are going to act. You can't control outside circumstances, but you always have the power to choose. In fact, in life, you have one choice to make over and over and over again. And that's to accept things as they are, or take responsibility for changing them. You see, we have a challenge. And it's something that Viktor Frankl wrote about in that book, Man's Search for Meaning, when I paraphrase, when he said that we who were in the concentration camps remember those people who shared their only piece of bread, even though they were hungry, those people who comforted others, even though they themselves were suffering the same tragic circumstances. It is a testimony to the greatest of all human freedoms. And that's to choose your attitude in any given set of circumstances. And so I get frustrated at times when I feel seduced, or when I see friends falling into what I call a state of cynicism, becoming cynical about the world, surrendering to a cynicism which is ultimately a toxic spiritual state. It infects your body and prevents you from seeing faint hope amidst glaring problems. It begins to have you surrender to what is, as opposed to take responsibility for what possibly can be. This idea that you allow your inability to do everything in this world to undermine your determination to do something where you are. It's getting caught up in what I call a state of sedentary agitation, where you're upset about what's going on in the world, but you're failing to recognize your own power to do something about it. And this is an underestimated power. I get frustrated that when people look at the world and say there's too much hate, they don't realize that there's only one way to deal with that hate, and that is to manifest love. I tell you, I have a degree in science. I'm a STEM subject person. It's the most profound of all sciences. It's political science. And so I can't necessarily tell you about physics, but I know that there's no way to conquer darkness with more darkness. It can only be the light you choose. And I see so many people who believe things but fail to manifest them in their world. And indeed, I fall into that trap myself, for having such strong beliefs but failing to demonstrate them in the small acts around me. I have a saying about people. I tell you, look, I don't care what your faith is, but before you talk to me about your religion, show it to me in how you treat other people. Before you tell me how much you love your God, show it to me in how much you love all his children. Before you preach to me about the passion you have for your faith, teach me about it through your compassion for your neighbors. For in the end, I'm not as interested in what you have to tell or sell as in how you choose to live or give. It's about what you do in your decisions where you are. I learned from my family that we all must blossom where we are planted. We all must manifest our truth where we are, and that gets me to the subject of tolerance. You see, we as a nation seem to be getting caught up in this idea that the highest aspiration for us as a country is to be a nation of tolerance. If you tolerate somebody, to me, you're just stomaching their right to be different. You're saying, hey, if you disappear off the face of the earth, I'm no better off or worse off because I was just tolerating you. But that's not what we're called to be in this country. We are called to be a nation that goes beyond tolerance to love. Tolerance is the floor, love is the ceiling. And if you want to be a patriot, you have to understand patriotism means love of country, which necessitates loving your countrymen and women. We are called to love. If you look at our founding documents of this nation, and they are imperfect, and I'm gonna say that even though it might sound controversial because it was about the times we were in. If you look at those founding documents, Native Americans are referred to as savages. Women are not referred to as all. African Americans are referred to as fractions of human beings. But yet in those founding documents is a genius and a truth and a testimony to this idea of love that is so profound. On the planet Earth, we are the oldest constitutional democracy, the first country to write down on paper that, hey, we're not going to be a nation that all looks alike or has the same origin. We're not going to be a nation that all speaks the same language or all prays in the same way. We're not a theocracy. We're going to be a nation that puts forth into the universe ideas of love. Our founding fathers understood that. In the Declaration of Independence, they put forth a profound declaration of interdependence, an acknowledgement that we need each other, that we can't just tolerate each other, we have to find ways to work together. At the end of that Declaration of Independence is that testimony of what it will take to make this country go far. It says, we pledge to each other our lives and our fortunes and our sacred honor. And so I say we cannot be tolerant because tolerance is becoming accustomed to injustice. Love is becoming disturbed and activated by another's adverse condition. If we tolerate, we cross the street. If we love, we confront, we approach, we embrace. Tolerance builds fences. Love opens doors. Tolerance breeds indifference. Love demands engagement. Tolerance couldn't care less, but love always cares more. And so if you are condemning the world and the meanness in politics, you should be one that manifests kindness and demonstrates to the world that being strong doesn't mean you have to be mean, being tough doesn't mean you have to be cruel. But yet I said I wanted to talk to you about my mistake. You see, all of these words are great, but they're nothing if we don't manifest them in those individual decisions we make. I've often said, as I've learned, a tough lesson I've learned in life is that the biggest thing you can do in any day is often a small act of kindness, decency, or love. In fact, the temptation as we charge out of college and charge to our careers is to rush for the big victory, the big win, the big election. But I tell you this right now, what matters most is how are you living your values with those around you. It was a great woman named Alice Walker who wrote, "The real revolutionary is always concerned with the least glamorous of things, with raising a reading level from 2nd grade to 3rd, with simplifying history and writing it down or reciting it for the old folks, with helping illiterates fill out food stamp forms, for they must eat, revolution or not. The dull, frustrating work of the revolutionary artist, it means most of all staying close enough to people to be there when they need you." And so my confession, I came to Newark after I graduated from graduate school so full of a desire to make a difference. I moved onto Martin Luther King Boulevard, just a couple miles from where we're sitting right now. But in the mid-1990s, while the north end of Martin Luther King Boulevard had universities and great high schools and Essex County College, the south end was full of drugs and violence and challenges. And I moved into the high-rise projects that were there called brick towers and began to work with the community. And soon I was encouraged to run for political office, and I became a city council person and began to get my head full of these ideas that we were going to transform the city, that we were going to show America the greatness of Newark and inspire places all around this country. My goals got bigger and bigger, but I was still living in brick towers with a great community of people. I ran for mayor in 2002, and I have to suggest to you guys all, this is an aside, but if you're going to have a spectacular failure like losing an election, have a documentary team there to capture it, because it works out pretty good sometimes. I ran for election in 2002 to be the mayor of this city, and I lost. But the very night of my defeat, I pledged that we had not yet begun to fight, that we would still keep pushing. And so I went back to work, dreaming and fighting to be the mayor of this great city. And during that time, living in these buildings for almost a decade, I watched the kids around me growing up. And I started coming home, and a bunch of boys started hanging out in the lobby of my building in brick towers. Now, this was a tough building. It was a decaying building, elevators barely worked, it was infested by vermin, it had challenges with heat and hot water, but we had a strong community. And when I started seeing some of the kids I knew become high school students hanging out in my lobby, they were great kids, and I would come home at night and I would talk with them. One of them reminded me just of my dad. He was just like my father with his wit and his humor. Both him and my dad grew up in similar circumstances. My dad born in '36, this guy just a teenager, but they were both born poor to a single mother. They both were, mothers couldn't take care of them, and they were both raised by their grandmothers. Him living 4 floors below me, his name was Hassan Washington, lived 4 floors below me with his grandmother, and every time I saw him, I thought of my father. Well, I'll tell you this, I started coming home, and in that lobby of that building, I began to smell something that I had only smelled as pungently when I was in college. It was marijuana. And I tell you this, alarm bells went off. You see, because I had learned that there are 2 justice systems in America, that we live in a nation, as Brian Stevenson says, that you get treated better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. And I knew that in America there is no difference between blacks and Latinos and whites for violating drug laws, but their drug laws are enforced very differently in privileged communities than in inner cities. In fact, I knew that for young black kids and young white kids, there's no difference in using drugs or selling drugs, but actually a young black kid will be arrested about 4 times more likely than someone that's white. And I knew that these kids had no margin for error in their life because we live in a nation where a nonviolent drug charge, so doing something that the last 2 presidents did, that as soon as you get that charge and conviction, you find it impossible to get a job, you find it hard to get a loan from a bank, you can't get a Pell Grant, you can't even get food stamps in many states, and you can't even get public housing. And so I decided that I was going to intervene with these kids. And I started to bring them out. I asked them, let's go to the movies, guys, any movie you want to see. And I thought they were going to take me to a home improvement movie because they said, let's go see Saw. And I said, okay, Saw, you know, Hammer, Saw. Turned out to be something different. I took them out to a diner here in Newark, Andros Diner, and I brought friends of mine in to meet with them, guys who had been involved with drugs but had gotten out, and we started talking about setting up mentor programs, and I felt good that we were gonna help pull these kids back from dangerous behavior. But then I got busy because it was time to run for mayor of the city of Newark. And I got so busy that I didn't follow through with the mentoring. I didn't follow through with the things I was going to do for these kids. But I would still come home every night from campaigning, and those kids would be in that lobby, and they were so awesome to me. I'd come home tired, and they would lift me up. They would cheer and clap for me. They would tell me that they were going to vote for me, that they were going to get everyone to vote for me. One night I come home, and they all have these lawn signs, and they're holding them up in the air, chanting what I had dreamed of hearing, the title I so desperately wanted, calling me Mayor Booker, Mayor Booker. And it made my back stand up straight, and I waved to them as I walked like walking through a parade. I don't know if the elevators were working that day, but the doors opened up, and I lifted that elevator up, feeling great, until I thought to myself, where do they get those lawn signs from? They're expensive. Well, I won that election, and before you knew it, I was off. But I got death threats, and suddenly they set up police officers in brick towers. And the kids, I don't care who you are, but if you're a teenager, you don't want to hang out where the cops hang out, so I never saw those young guys again. But I was too busy running around the city. Every time there was a shooting in Newark, I would try to run to the scene, talk to our residents, give street-level conversations, telling people about our plans, that we're better than this, that we're going to do something about it. One day I was called to the scene of a murder. A body was covered up. Another one was being loaded into an ambulance. And as the ambulance took off, I turned to the police officers, talked to them. I barely even affirmed the humanity on the pavement, and I talked to the police officers, and then I went over to talk to residents, and then went on to my day. But that night I was sitting home in brick towers, going through my BlackBerry, looking at the reports, and suddenly my eyes saw the police report from the murder, and it stung me. The name I looked at, the boy who was murdered, the teenager, the name was Hassan Washington. From my building 4 floors below me, the young man I had promised that we were going to set up mentor programs. I will never forget his funeral here at Perry's Funeral Home, walking into the basement of that building. There we were, crowded in that basement, piled in on top of each other, chained together in grief, moaning and groaning in the bowels of that building, to come together for what is too great of an American reality: yet another boy murdered in a box. I was a newly elected mayor of the city in this big position, but I felt so small. I stood in the back of that funeral home as people, friends came over to me, neighbors, teachers. I hugged them. I was leaning on their lights, but the shame was too much. And I told my staff, we're leaving. I'm embarrassed to say, but I left before the services even began. I went back to City Hall, charged up the steps. went back into my office, this new mayoral office, and I slammed the door and sat on my couch and began to cry. For the first time, I wept in that mayor's office because all I could think about was Hassan was just like my dad. And his community would not let him fail, but we failed Hassan. I failed Hassan. As I rushed for my brass ring, I rushed right past a boy in need. I didn't manifest my values and my ideals. And then what happened? We were all crowded in a funeral home, there for his death, but where were we for his life? Class of 2016, the message I want to leave you with first and foremost is that you're going to hit points in your life where you stumble, where you fall, where you fail yourself and your values, but failure is not final if you don't give up. That life is going to give you stumbling blocks that knock you flat on your stomach, and real courage will always be defined not by the big battle cry or the big fight. Real courage will be defined in those small moments where just breathing is hard and you have to convince yourself to get up, put on your clothes, get out the door, and go on into another day of loving. I want you to know, class of 2016, that love does not always leap canyons. Sometimes the most important type of love in your life and the most needed in your life is the kind that goes in small steps, the consistent acts of love and kindness that you share to others. I want to end by saying that small acts, it's something that I benefited from. There was an elderly woman in the buildings that I lived in, and she saw me in pain after another boy's death, and she left me with this message that I leave with you. She repeated these two words to me over and over again, because all she did seeing me in pain was open her arms. She said nothing, but as I curled up in her arms, 6'3", an elderly woman just 5 feet tall, she held me and she rubbed my back and she gave me two words that are advice to me, and they have nothing to do about religion, but yet your commitment to your values. They have nothing to do about the pie in the sky when you die, but everything about the commitment you make to live your values today. The two words she said to me as she rubbed my back was stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful. Class of 2016, stay faithful. Because you've come this far by faith. Stay faithful. Because it's not the big faith, but the small acts of faith, sometimes the size of a mustard seed that can move mountains. Stay faithful. Because you are the product of faith undeterred, love that has been grand. Stay faithful and hear the world calling to you right now. Heed that call. Hear our nation calling to you. Hear that call. But most importantly, hear the calls of the people around you right now. The child, the elderly, the person in pain, the person in hurt. If you manifest that kind of faith and that kind of love, you may not change the world, but you will make a world of difference every step of your life to thousands and thousands of people. God bless you, class of 2016.
We are so proud he's our senator and our commencement speaker today. Another round of applause for Senator Booker, please.